My brother's fiance licked my face. Now he's furious. Did I do something wrong? She says it was an accident, but he is not listening. Hey Reddit, this all started a few weeks ago, and I'm still not sure what happened or how it escalated the way it did. Honestly, I never expected things to blow up this much. I've always been really close with my brother, Dan. We've been best friends growing up, and even though we've had some disagreements over the years, nothing has ever really gotten in the way of our bond. He recently got engaged to Emily, and while I didn't know her super well, I thought she was fine. We've hung out a few times at family events, and she always seemed nice enough, though a little shy. It was a Saturday night, and we were celebrating Dan and Emily's engagement at a family barbecue. Everyone was in good spirits, drinking, talking, and catching up. There was a lot of laughter, and it felt like a perfect evening. But then things took a weird turn. I was talking with a few people, sitting on the deck with some beers, when Emily came over. She was standing a little too close for my comfort, but I didn't think too much of it at first. We were having casual conversation, just chatting about random things. It didn't feel off at the time, but now that I think about it, something definitely wasn't right. Out of nowhere, she leaned in and licked my face. I know it sounds bizarre, but that's exactly what happened. She just did it out of nowhere, right on my cheek. At first, I didn't know how to react. I froze. I wasn't sure if I should laugh, say something, or just ignore it. I ended up laughing awkwardly, hoping it was just some kind of weird joke. But deep down, I was uncomfortable. I didn't know why she did it, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. A couple of minutes later, Dan came over to where I was sitting. He must have sensed something was off because he immediately asked me what happened. I told him, trying to play it off, but honestly, I think I made it worse by not addressing it seriously enough. I told him Emily had licked my cheek, and I just laughed about it, thinking it would blow over. I shouldn't have done that. Dan's face changed instantly. He didn't laugh. He didn't think it was funny. His expression turned serious, and I could tell he was getting mad. He looked at Emily, who seemed a little embarrassed but didn't seem to think it was a big deal. She said it was an accident and that she didn't mean to make things weird, but Dan wasn't having it. He was angry, and I could tell he was upset by what happened. He turned to me and said, "Why didn't you say something? You should have told me right away." I was taken aback. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but Dan seemed really upset. I tried to explain, but it was clear he wasn't listening. He told me to go home for the night, and I was completely confused. I didn't understand what I had done wrong. I didn't lick anyone's face, after all. But I guess I should have spoken up earlier. The next day, Dan didn't talk to me. He didn't return my texts, didn't pick up the phone. I tried reaching out to him several times, but he wouldn't answer. I was left in the dark, unsure of what I had done wrong or why it had blown up like this. Then Emily reached out to me. She texted me, saying she was sorry for what had happened and that it was a total accident. She didn't mean to make me uncomfortable, and she hoped I wasn't mad. She also said that Dan wouldn't talk to her either, and she didn't know what to do. I felt bad for her, but at the same time, I was still kind of thrown off by the whole situation. A few more days went by, and I still couldn't get through to Dan. I tried everything, but he just ignored me. He wasn't responding to anything I said, and it felt like he was cutting me out completely. Emily tried to calm things down, saying it wasn't that big of a deal, but every time I tried to talk to Dan, he got more and more upset. Eventually, Emily called me, asking if we could meet up to talk. She said she needed to explain things better, and maybe we could clear the air. I agreed to meet her, hoping that maybe talking it out would help. When we sat down, she admitted that she had been drinking quite a bit that night and didn't remember much of what happened. She said the whole thing was a huge lapse in judgment, and she felt embarrassed. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't mean to make things weird. I wasn't sure how to feel. I mean, I didn't want to make things worse, but part of me felt like she needed to own up to it more. It wasn't just a harmless mistake. I told her that while I understood it might have been an accident, I still didn't think it was okay. She apologized again and said that she was scared of losing Dan over something so small. It seemed like she genuinely felt bad, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if I completely believed her. I tried to talk to Dan again, hoping that maybe now he'd hear me out. I told him everything Emily had said, hoping it would help him understand the situation better. But when I tried to explain, he just shut me down. He was still angry, and I felt like he wasn't even listening to me. He said I should have called him out immediately and that I was letting it slide instead of taking things seriously. I felt stuck. It was like no matter what I said or did, nothing was going to change. Eventually, I decided the best thing to do was give Dan some space. I told him I respected his decision, but that I didn't think I had done anything wrong. Emily kept apologizing, but it didn't feel like it was making anything better. So here we are now, weeks later. Dan still hasn't spoken to me. I'm still not sure what I did wrong, and it's like things are just hanging in the air. I've tried to make things right, but nothing seems to work. Emily keeps texting, asking if I'm okay, but I'm honestly not sure how to feel about everything. I'm stuck in this weird place, not knowing what to do next. I want things to go back to the way they were, but I'm starting to wonder if that's even possible anymore. Did I do something wrong? Should I have reacted differently? Or was this just one of those things that got blown way out of proportion? I just want to fix things, but right now, I have no idea how. Update. After my last post, I thought things might get better, but they've only become more complicated. Dan still won't speak to me, and I'm left wondering what went wrong. I've tried everything: texts, calls, even showing up at his place, but he ignores me completely. Emily has apologized repeatedly, but nothing is changing between us. A couple of days ago, I decided to reach out to Emily again to see if we could clear the air. When we met, she admitted that she'd spoken to Dan, and he was just as furious with her. She said he hadn't even replied to her messages. The whole situation had escalated beyond the cheek-licking incident. It was about the lack of communication afterward. Emily apologized again, saying it was a huge lapse in judgment on her part, and she felt bad for both me and Dan. I realized that if I wanted things to get better, I needed to take action myself. I reached out to Dan to apologize for not addressing the situation earlier. I told him I understood why he was angry and that I never intended to hurt him. But despite my efforts, he hasn't replied, and I'm still left in the dark. I don't know what I did wrong, but at this point, I just want things to go back to normal. Another update. So after trying everything, I finally reached out to Dan directly. Emily had tried to talk to him on my behalf, but it didn't seem to help. I felt like I needed to talk to him myself, face to face, to clear the air. I sent him a text explaining how sorry I was for brushing off the situation and that I didn't mean to make him uncomfortable. I told him I didn't know why Emily had done what she did, but I understood how it could have hurt him. Surprisingly, he replied, saying he appreciated my honesty. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was progress. He said he was still hurt, but he was willing to talk. A few days later, I met with Emily again, and she admitted that her behavior was out of line. She said she'd been drinking and hadn't thought about the consequences. She apologized again, saying she never intended for things to escalate this much. I still wasn't sure if I fully believed her, but I could tell she was genuinely sorry. I decided to try talking to Dan one more time, hoping things would improve. Final update. After several weeks of tension and frustration, I finally got a chance to talk to Dan face to face. It wasn't easy. To be honest, I wasn't sure how things would go, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting for him to reach out. It was time to take matters into my own hands. We met up at a coffee shop, and the air was thick with awkwardness. I started by apologizing again, explaining that I never meant for anything to go this far. I told him that I understood how the situation must have made him feel, and I assured him that I never intended to disrespect him or our relationship. I told him that I didn't think it was as big of a deal when it happened, but looking back, I understood why he was upset. Dan listened quietly. There was a lot of emotion in his eyes, but he didn't interrupt. He finally spoke, admitting that he was hurt by the whole thing, not just by what happened but by the way it was handled afterward. He felt like I hadn't been honest with him about how serious the situation was. He told me that the lack of communication made everything worse. Dan was angry, but I could tell that he was trying to understand my side as well. It wasn't an immediate fix, but the conversation was a breakthrough. We both acknowledged our mistakes, and it felt like we were starting to rebuild trust. Dan said he wasn't ready to forgive Emily yet, but he appreciated that she had reached out and admitted she made a mistake. He was still hurt, but he didn't want to lose his relationship with her over one mistake. I didn't expect him to forgive her right away, and I understand why he's cautious. As for me, I feel like I've done everything I can. I apologized, I listened, and I took responsibility. I know it will take time to completely heal the rift between us, but I'm hopeful that things will eventually improve. Dan and I are back in touch, and though things aren't perfect, I feel like we're on the right track. The tension is still there, but I think with time, things will get back to normal. A big part of this whole experience for me has been realizing how fragile relationships can be. I took a lot of things for granted before, and I never expected something like this to drive such a wedge between us. But going through this has shown me how important it is to communicate openly and be aware of how our actions affect the people we care about. I never intended to hurt Dan, but the truth is, I did. And now, I have to live with that until things heal. Moving forward, I'm trying to take everything I've learned from this situation and apply it to my other relationships, especially with Dan. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes, and I'm committed to making things right. Whether or not things go back to the way they were remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful that with patience and time, my relationship with Dan will eventually be restored. It may take a while, but I'm willing to wait for as long as it takes.